Okay, this is the Sam Auxier Jr. Show, and coming to you live from Frederick, Maryland. And we got a subject tonight. We're going to go over a Cammer 427 Cammer engine, as you like, over my shoulder here. And we're going to do it old school. We know today you can throw a ton of money into it and probably do new school for about 100 grand. But anyway, I'm going to go through it like we used to do it. So hang in there, get ready. And if you're going to make a comment, you need to make it, and I'll check it ever so often, but you need to make it from my page with Sam Auxier Jr. show page, because it will not show up on my personal page, although the show will be on the personal page. Anyway, let's get started. First of all, there were many of these cameras, I believe to be 500 of them, and in the crates at Holman and Moody, or somewhere around that number. But anyway, I happened to dig up a picture of John Holman with these engines stacked high. So there was a number of them there. They were a mixture of NASCAR motors and drag racing motors with a 2.4 on them. Anyway, that's believed to be about 500 of them. So anyway, we'll move on from there. They were all side oilers, and I'm going to go through, because a lot of people always ask, what's a side oiler? And to top it off, many people purchased these crate engines, and I think in the end they were selling for like $500 an engine. So they were dirt cheap. People bought them up, and I still, every once in a while, I hear somebody saying, "Oh, I got one of those in my garage." So it's still in the crate. So good deal if you got one, because it's probably worth about 25,000 right now. So nothing wrong with that. That was a good investment if you did buy it for 500. Like I said, all of them were side oilers, and there's a difference between a cammer side oiler and a high riser or a tunnel port high riser deal. The difference being the drain holes, the oil drain holes from the cylinder heads on a cammer drain down through the block back at the rear. And that made the difference on a cammer block and a high riser, so to speak. So those holes, which complicated it further, without having any head gaskets, because the head gaskets needed to be made that way too. But shortly out of after the amount of them were used up, head gaskets became very rare. And what we did was we drilled the heads, put two fittings in the back of each head, and ran them down to the oil pan. And so therefore, the oil drained out of the heads down to the pan. And even you could use 427 high riser or tunnel port, whatever you want to use them, or any other cylinder head combination you'd want. So worked pretty good. And so after that, the other issue with blocks, and this is a pretty big issue, and that is the older blocks tend to have nickel, a higher grade of nickel in them than the later blocks. And that was really a problem that we tried to avoid. Sometimes if you need a block, you need a block, and you got to have it fast. Then you obviously went ahead and used the block, but they were shaky on boring the block. They were really thin walls, and we tried to avoid them at all costs. But like I said, sometimes you had to do what you had to do with it. So anyway, um, the other part of the block, and one thing on the head gaskets. Uh, I think Cometics today advertises that they have a 4.400 cylinder head gasket. Uh, but of course, a stock bore camera is 4.423. So I don't know how much work it is to make that one work, or maybe Cometics makes one smaller. I just looked it up real quick on the internet there. So anyway, the holes in the head, like I said, the holes in the head and the holes in the block uh, and the hole in the head gasket lined up for doing a a real camera block. But of course, we were managed to fix it, get around that deal. So anyway, there's another issue, and I know um, a lot of people. There is on a side oiler block, there is a relief valve in the back of the block. Um, and that winds up being straight back. Uh, Let me see if I think I got a picture of it here. Yeah, there it is. Back in the block, there's a relief valve. Um, and of course, that takes out the excess oil past the relief pressure. Now, I personally have never, ever made that valve active. I always shimmed it closed. So oil pressure was 100, 120 pounds cold, and we never, ever allowed it to operate because Ford told us that the two throws in the rear of the block, they only had at 7,000 RPM, they only had 20 pounds of oil pressure there. So, needless to say, we shot up the oil pressure as much as we could and maintain it and keep it there. So, and that's that little valve in the back. So, anyway, I never use them. If you got one, you can obviously do however you want to do it, but I never had one and used it in a camera or or a high riser or a tunnel port. Never, because it needs all the oil it can get back there. So, word to the wise there. All right, now we're starting at the bottom of the engine and we're working our way up here. We actually used some of the pistons that came in the engines. They were heavy slugs, no doubt about it. But they were, God, I don't know. I don't recall what they weighed, but it was a lot. So anyway, in saying that, the other issue with Ford and this piston was that the dome, unfortunately, did not match up to the cylinder head, which was another issue. Why they didn't make a match up, I have no idea. But if you had to, you would certainly like to have a piston that's much lighter. Today's world, you would have a piston that's much lighter. So we actually took those pistons, the stock pistons that came in a camera, actually took them we were just outside of Washington, D.C. We actually took those pistons over to a machine shop in Baltimore and had them tracer milled, and took the heads and had the tracer mill fit those heads or fit those pistons to the heads, which allowed us to lengthen the aluminum rod. It allowed us to bring up the compression substantially, because if I remember correctly, we were about 200 thousandths further up in the cylinder head by tracer milling the pistons. Of course, in today's world, like I said, I think we would just get a piston that conformed to the dome of the head. So, like I said before, I don't know why Ford didn't make that little item there, but obviously changing that increased the compression ratio substantially, which gave it more horsepower. Real simple. And back in the day, we actually took a steel 427 crank, and Bill Coleman, who is just now retiring, actually did every bit of our machine work, and he actually did all the machine work on all of our current day stuff that we had out there. And he's just now retiring, which he obviously deserved to retire. And Larry Ladd, who is over in Laurel, Ladd Sporting Service, he is still working on cylinder heads, and he's the only person that ever did our cylinder heads. And also with Bill Coleman, Bill is the only one that ever did our machine work. So he is certainly an experienced person, put it that way. He's the only one unfortunately, I don't trust a lot of people for doing that type of work, because one little mistake can cost you a lot. He never assembled anything. We always did the measurements and the assembly of the engine, and gave him the specs to what to do, and which he already knew what to do when he got it. So we ran the heads, cylinder heads. We ran about, no matter what it is, high riser or tunnel ports or cameras, every 2 weeks we actually took them off the car, and they went through them, and to keep everything fresh on them, including valve springs. I'll go over that in a bit. But the crankshafts, we widened the cranks out, which was really tricky because obviously, as you can imagine, we widen the crank and it becomes very flimsy if you go too far. So we used at that stage of the game, we used 392 Hemi rods, and we took those Hemi rods and had to narrow those rods just a little bit to keep from, having to widen the crank too much. But we did use Mickey Thompson rods, and we used the, excuse me, and we used the ability to use a blank end of the connecting rod, the upper end, obviously. And that allowed us to push the piston up in the cylinder wall another, I believe it was right about 200 thousandths that we managed to further the rod and compression ratio. Ford claimed they had 12.5 to 1 compression ratio. We never actually checked a stock engine. We just worked from what we needed to do. Excuse me, a little phone call there. But we worked on that, and that was really, unless you have the bottom end of the engine under control and allows you to run the RPM that you need to run. And we were running, 9,000, 85 to 9 grand all the time. So in order for it to live, that is the only way that using the bottom end, widening the crank, using the Chrysler rod. Otherwise, you were just wasting your time looking for a disaster to happen. A cammer, the top end, way more RPM than the bottom end. That we always said that the top end was worth 10,000, and the bottom end was good for maybe 9,500. So, but anyway, it's sort of a mixture of deal. But today's world, with the new style cranks and the matter of fact, I have a picture of a crank that we used in a car not too long ago. Here's a billet crank. This crank is actually Crowler crank, and it's a steel billet, and it's as you can see, the throws are knife edged for cutting through the oil and splashing it to the sides. And you can see the rod journals are, of course, that nasty word is Chevrolet rod journals, small block. So, but anyway, it works. So we stick with that one. But so here also, let me get on to the next subject here. And Bill's uncle, he was way up there in age, but he'd spend hours on widening a stock steel crank. And it was just a tough time consuming deal. Today, you just try and get the crank already made, already widened, and we rock and roll from there. But in today's world, obviously everything's different. You can get blocks that are a lot better than what we ran, and that's the thing that I think really give it strength, and that's what it takes with these engines now. You got to have the strength in the bottom end to keep it together. The other thing is, no matter what you do with the bottom end, the pistons, the rings, all that stuff, if you don't get the engine to seal up, you are really spinning your wheels. And so it's you got to get. If you look at, I tell you whose video you can go look at, and that's yeah, can't remember the guy's name here offhand, but anyway, here it is. Yeah, I'll get it in a minute. I guess it's on my notes here. So anyway, he knows the exact amount of the honing and what it really takes to seal these rings, these new rings up. And they're using all kinds of crazy things and using all kinds of special honing techniques. So it's really a whole lot different world today than, yeah, his name, Lake Speed Jr. Look up any of his videos. He works for a Power Seal, and he can explain it all to you and what it takes to make this stuff work and seal up and make the horsepower. If it doesn't seal up, don't worry about making the horsepower. It's not going to make it. So you're wasting your time on it. So also on the see, I got another picture here of okay, let me get it here. Oh, I do have another one here for the side oiler. this is one of the high risers that I built, and this has, as you can see, the plugs across here with the white Teflon tape around them. Uh, that's where the block is drilled straight on through, and those holes lead up to the camshaft area and the crankshaft area, and that is what is called a side oiler, and that's the best system that Ford had to actually um, deliver the most amount of oil to the crank and to the camshaft. So it's nice setup. Of course, everything today is a different world, but that's the way it is. So also, um, uh, we discussed the cylinder wall finish, and they have a new uh, coating that they spray into a cylinder wall, and they finish it off uh, with these selective different hone jobs and the different grits. And so that's really a whole nother world, but that's what every state of the art is becoming now. So get rid of that one. The other thing with the camera, um, and everybody seems to have a bad problem with the uh, chain system. Everybody goes, "Oh, that chain." Uh, the chain, we never actually had any problem with the chain system. Um, the chain we actually used, believe it or not, was motorcycle chain. Um, and I believe it was like a 43 pitch deal. And I don't know exactly um, what a stock one was, but it was slightly smaller than the stock chain was. And but we never had an issue with it. The actual wave that everyone talks about retarding or advancing the cams, actual wave comes in up here at the top, and that's what creates the craziness between the right and the left cam. But reality was, you're really talking about probably 5 degrees difference on them, which is enough uh, to make it not like it. And but back in the day, that's what we did. That's the way we ran it, and that was uh, how it all worked, and it did work. So can't complain about that part of it. Um, uh, Let me hide that part again, and then Here's another part of the chain system. This is the adjuster. The adjuster's right over here, and right down in this section here, and that's the arm, the swing arm, and you can see the actual camera timing chain. It's still used a chain down between the dummy cam. There was actually a dummy cam went back between the two throws on the camshaft, first and second bearing, and then the um, outside of that had a sprocket here, and it ran the cams on the other part of that other side of it. So anyway, quite an interesting setup. Uh, I know a lot of people condemned it for whatever, but we never had any problem out of it. And I don't know anybody else that raced as much as we did that had a problem with it. So um, let me see what other thing I missed here. I'm sure I did. The cams. Let's get on with the cams here. the actual cams were only available. We only took them available through Crane. Crane took the blanks, or not the blanks, but the ones off that we would send them, and they would grind. They were called 660s, and they were billet, and they were also very high quality, but we were very limited. I mean, we didn't have any kind of any kind of thing to change it, or we didn't have enough experiment time where they would give us another set of cams or something. So unfortunately, we were stuck with those, although they did work good. But we still had and they still have it today. The pro stock cars today still only get 8 or 10 runs out of a set of springs. And that's exactly what, we got out of them. You could run 8 or 10 runs, and that was the end of them. And, but because of the ramp, when you got that much ramp on the cam, and you're constantly compressing that spring, it's such a heavy rate. It's hard not to kill the valve spring. I mean, you just do. And unfortunately, it's part of, if you're going to be in pro stock racing, you're going to have to change them all the time. That's just the facts of life there. We had sort of a unique. You know what? Before I get too far ahead of myself here, we have, and this was one of the unfortunate things that Ford did. And Ford did it to guys that would come in off the street and buy sodium valves or the light hollow stem lightweight valves. And unfortunately, people bought these sets of valves, and they were absolutely they popped the head off of them. It was just common occurrence. And the reason is that SP valves, they're marked SP on the valve stem. If there's a SP on that valve stem and it's sitting on your parts shelf, throw it in the dumpster. You'll save yourself a whole lot of trouble, because it will be a lot of trouble, because they actually popped the heads off of them were just common, everyday happening. I can remember one case where a fella come into my shop, and we were come back to the engine room, and we're working on the engine, putting an assembly engine together, and I had taken the valves out of some heads for a camera, sat them up on the shelf. Well, they had never been run, so obviously they looked beautiful. And this gentleman come in, and I'm not going to mention his name, so no need of doing that. And he come in, and he's seen those valves up there, and he says, I need a new set of valves for my camera. And I said, no. I said, you can't buy those valves. I said, you don't want those valves. They're nothing but paperweights. And he says, but I can run them. He said, I know I can run them. And I said, no, you don't want them. I argued back and forth with him, and he finally said, I'm going to take them. Here's $100. I'm going to take them. I said, I don't want $100. I don't want it. Keep it. I don't want to see you blow the engine up with that valve. So I went ahead, and he threw the $100 bill down, grabbed the valves, and went on out the door. I said, well, we're going to hear from him. Sure enough, we're at the track the following week, and he starts the car up, warms it up on the trailer, bam, drops a valve right there. Never even got it on the track. So, but the cure for that is a double SP valve. Double SP valves have all been x-rayed, and the welds have been checked where they weld them together, put them together, seal them together, whatever you want to call it. I've never dropped or broke a double SP valve. So be careful. I know there's a lot of parts floating around out there, but I don't care if you got a camera or a high riser tunnel port, and you take that valve and look at it on the end of it, on the stem of it. If it says SP on it, use it for a paperweight. That's all it's good for. Don't be a fool and run that deal. So, okay, one of the final things, and I'm not getting into the what we did as far as clearances and all. Bottom end clearances is pretty much the same as any other engine. We've gone as tight as 1.5 on the rods and 2.5 on the mains, and we had various ones of that. So aluminum rods, you need about 60 thousandths cylinder to head clearance. Steel rods, you can get down close to 40 on it. The other part of this deal, let me see if I got some pictures here. Let me see. Oh, okay, I got one here. This one you'll find very interesting. there are no more of them, as far as I know. But here is this is actually a picture in my 71 Mustang Pro Stock car. This manifold absolutely brought the car to life. I mean, this was a game changer here. And Vic Edelbrock made this intake for us. And what you see there is steel tubing. Okay. And underneath here is a plate. And this is a big block Chevy Plenum. And these are 780. Those are 780 carburetors, Ford carburetors. And Vic Edelbrock made this, and it's got a injection manifold plate on it, in it, under it. And this was all, believe it or not, steel tubing, aluminum plates, and aluminum intake plate, injector plate. Now, obviously, you couldn't weld all these together, so Vic fiberglassed it together. So it was fiberglassed, but it worked. And I don't have to tell you, it was truly a, I think we picked up probably a 1/10.5, maybe 2/10 with this intake. I mean, it was just night and day with the car. It was crazy. But Vic did a fantastic job, and he made one for Nicholson also. And I think he actually made that one first before mine. But absolutely just a kick-ass intake, and just amazing, really, on there. Now, if we had at that time, if we had a set of 1050 carburetors for it, we'd been even a step further. So the engine is absolutely my favorite engine of everything we had built. And that's probably one. The Cleveland is my other one, but this one, 427 Cammer, very much my favorite. And I think we had back then had all the later stuff, and what they make for all these engines now, the blocks and the cylinder heads, uh, you it would have been hard to beat. And so I was obviously one of the happiest campers with that combination. And then NHRA pulled the skids out from under us, and they wanted us all to use small blocks. So, and that's what we did after that. So, a shame. I don't even know where the big block or the camera, not the camera, but the intake actually wound up being. So, anyway, uh, another bit of news. We're going to in January. We are going to send the '69 Mustang, my one that Bob Lindstrat has had for years, out on the West Coast, and we're going to put that across the auction block at Barrett Jackson in January at Scottsdale, Arizona. So really excited about that. I'm hoping somebody will get that. That is more on the East Coast than Bob is on the West Coast. So we'll hope, and that we hope and pray that that will happen. And of course, that car had a tunnel port in it, and fantastic. Just a great car, great running car. Did it all, and I think that's, I was really excited to hear it whenever Bob called me, told me he was going to, because at that point there's no reserve at Barrett Jackson, unlike Mecum. So they both have their own unique things. So, but I'm looking forward to it. So the we'll see how it goes. So uh, the let me get this off here a second. Okay, yeah. So we'll see how much Bob comes out, if anything. But anyway, that's about it for tonight. I've probably taken up enough of your time. So anyway, thanks everybody. Unfortunately, on here, let me see if anything. Hey, we got three. Can't hang up yet. Outside the box, SOHC, one of the most beautiful engines. I absolutely agree with you. Also outside the box, nothing more beautiful than old school engines. Love that intake. And outside 210s, huge. Yes, fantastic. We appreciate it. So anyway, thank you very much. Everyone have a great night, and we'll see you down the road somewhere.